Namaskar. Today is a very, very special day. Today, with us, we have a very, very special person in the studio. And it would be right for me to say pranam rather than namaskar. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another compelling episode of Indian Trailblazers, stories of inspiring Indians under our Made in India series. Today, let me take you to the United Kingdom. We are honored to host a guest whose life and work embody the essence of global citizenship and creative excellence. She's a poet, a writer, a translator, an editor, arts psychotherapist, and a cultural bridge builder whose journey spans continents, disciplines, and decades of work. Prepare to meet a luminary who has dedicated her life to the arts, literature, and community service while inspiring countless individuals across the globe. We are thrilled to introduce the limited edition woman, Dr. Debjani Chatterjee, MBE FRSL, an acclaimed poet and author of over 75 books whose works have been translated into multiple languages, including French, Bengali, Mandarin, and Arabic. Dr. Chatterjee's illustrious career has earned her numerous accolades, such as the Peterloo Poets Prize and the Muse India Poetry Translation Award. Her children's books, The Elephant-Headed God and Other Hindu Tales, were celebrated as a Children's Book of the Year fantasy. Dr. Chatterjee's remarkable academic journey includes degrees from the American University in Cairo, the University of Kent, Lancaster University, the Leeds Beckett University, along with an honorary doctorate from Sheffield Hallam University for her outstanding contributions to literature, the arts, and community. Her professional life has been equally diverse, with roles spanning the steel industry, education, racial equality, and arts psychotherapy. From serving as the director of Sheffield Racial Equality Council to representing UK at literary symposiums worldwide, Dr. Chatterjee has been a tireless advocate for inclusivity and cultural dialogues across the world. She has chaired and contributed to prestigious organizations, including the Poetry Society, the National Association of Writers in Education, and the Arts Council's Translation Committee. But beyond the accolades, what truly sets her apart is her ability to weave in stories that resonate deeply, bridging the gaps between cultures and generations. How does a life shaped by experiences in India, Japan, Bangladesh, Egypt, and Morocco affect her poetry? What drives her passion for storytelling? And how does she balance her role as a writer, a psychotherapist, and a cultural ambassador? From her formative years in India to her global literacy journey, Dr. Debjani Chatterjee's story is one of resilience, creativity, and an unyielding commitment to the arts. Audience, whether you are here to explore the intersections of culture and literature, or to be just inspired by an extraordinary life, this conversation promises to be unforgettable. Without much ado, let's give a warm welcome to the poet, to the writer, to the cancer warrior, the trailblazer herself, Dr. Debjani Chatterjee. Namaste, Doctor. How are you and how do you feel to be on my show?
Good day and namaskar. Thank you very much, my sister Meenakshi, for inviting me to come on this wonderful, wonderful show, which I have been following for a while. And I feel so honored because, you know, I've come across so many wonderful people on this show. And to be in such rich company is mega. So, yes, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for that comprehensive and glowing introduction. And yes, it's true. I am a UK-based Indian now, but at the same time, it's lovely to be doing this interview in India, on Indian soil, because right now, of course, I'm visiting India. So so I'm sitting here in Delhi, and you're in Vishakhapatnam, and and hopefully we are reaching out to not
Yes.
only an audience all over India, but hopefully an international audience as well. The wonders of modern technology.
Yes. Doctor, your childhood has spanned several countries: India, Japan, Bangladesh, and much, much beyond. Your father was on a very special job. How did these diverse upbringings shape your worldview? Today, you carried the Olympic flag for the United Kingdom, and the Indian diaspora was so proud to see an Indian girl do that. How did all your influences of travel as a child, your poetry, your storytelling happen to you?
I was born in India, and not surprisingly, even though perhaps if I count all the years that I've been in India on and off, and luckily there have been periodic sort of breaks in India. And this is because my father, who worked in the Foreign Service, did get an India posting after every two foreign postings. And I think that was really important, because it's very important to reconnect with one's cultural and other roots. So I'm glad of that. So even though those years, if I total them, were not very many compared to the many years that I've now lived in the UK, and also perhaps the many years I've lived in many different countries, if we add those up. But naturally, India has been a huge influence and continues to be, and also a great inspiration for me. And other countries that I've lived in, we have this saying, don't we, that, the whole world is one's family. And we definitely grew up with that idea in India. And so everywhere that I have lived has, in one sense, been like a home for me. So I've loved all the countries that I've lived in, and each country has left its mark. I do thank all the different countries and cultures, because they have all shaped me. Um, and and now, as I look back, I know that in one sense, the countries I have left behind, including India, of course, are all countries that have a particular look, and they have a particular look that is, if you like, frozen in time. And so, in
Yes.
a sense, it's good for me as somebody with my origins in India to keep coming back if I can, because, of course, no country stands still, as no culture stands still, and indeed no language stands still. So these are all dynamic because they are living. And so it is important to see how they change, and perhaps also to change with them to some extent. And yet at the same time, the India that I knew in my childhood will forever be there, because it's there in my memory, and it's also there now to an extent in my writing. And this is also true of the Japan that I grew up in, the Hong Kong that I grew up in, the Egypt, and so on. So I feel very grateful, actually, that I've been privileged to have so many different experiences of our wonderful and diverse planet.
Very true. Your poetry reflects themes of identity. You identify with yourself. It's not you. It's a little bit of India that travels with you. I've seen it. And I would like you to go back to the time when you were a young teenager and you wrote your first poem. I stopped because it inspired me to write that poetry of yours. She was that woman. You spoke about heroes, women heroes, right from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and how women were, how they stood as heroes, as leaders, as epic, legendary people. And your poetry talked about the pain of being a woman. Would you like to go back to the time when you actually, every time a poem writes, we cry, we die, we live again when we are able to express. How did it happen for you, Debjani?
Okay, it is a long story. I have to say that it was not my first poem, but it
Okay.
was the first poem to win international acclaim. I would say I began writing extremely young. So I was writing poetry and short stories as a child. And I also quickly discovered that since I wasn't very fond of maths in school, and my parents had this idea that because I didn't like maths, therefore I had to do more maths during weekends at home. And I discovered that before they could sit me down, with some arithmetic sums or whatever to solve, if I sat down and looked very busy, I was writing, and they said, "What are you doing?" And I would say, "I'm writing a poem now," or I'm writing a story. And I found my parents had this great respect for creativity. So they would say, "Oh, okay, you carry on then." And so that's really how it began. And I was also still quite young when my father collected some of the stories and poems that I wrote, had them cyclostyled, as we called it in those days, cyclostyled, and which is really going back a while, and stapled them together. And I actually distributed them to family and friends. And I would say that that was like my having my first book. And but my first stories and poems to get published. This happened as a teenager when I was in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, there was an international magazine for the Indian diaspora, and it was called Bharat Ratna. So I would
Wow.
write poems for that, and I would also write little poems and stories for one of the major uh, weekend newspapers in Hong Kong, English language newspapers. And then I Was That Woman came about because I was, let's see, I was about, yes, I was 19 when I first came to the United Kingdom to do my master's in English and American literature at the University of Kent. And I'd already been writing poetry for quite a long time. And also, I would say my poetry had changed a lot because as a child, my juvenile poetry was very much about animals, the parrots and the squirrels that I would see in our garden. And they were about some of the wonderful places, the mountains that I would see in hill stations like Mussoorie. But they had changed, and I was writing more about what inspired me, more about the contemporary world, and also um, our myths and legends. That's always been a very, very rich source of inspiration for me. So, so I was living in Canterbury at this time in the university hostel when I started writing I Was That Woman. And I obviously I could I can't say that I was all these great heroic women who were my inspiration. But I would say that they were all people that were role models for me. So, Joan of Arc from France, Begum Rokeya from Iraq, and of course Sita from the Ramayana, and so on. And these were women that I could identify with in some degree or the other. So I decided that I would bring them all together because it wasn't just one woman and it wasn't just one culture for me. It wasn't just one particular set of literary texts, but it was something universal that, had to be my inspiration. And so, and I also felt that these heroic women did have very many qualities in common. And so I decided to embrace all of them, and indeed to embrace all the many women as well, of whom we don't know enough, the women who don't even have a name in history. And I felt that as a writer, it was, up to me to kind of give those women a voice as well. And at the same time, to celebrate to celebrate the wonderful mothers and sisters that we have had, who have come down to us from history and from mythology and from literature. And so I Was That Woman is a poem that celebrates these women from so many different countries, from so many different time periods, and from so many different cultures, from so many different faith traditions. And and I think I also had this idea that in many cases these are women who have had to fight. They have had to fight against a patriarchal society. They've had to fight either a physical battle in some cases, or they have had to fight against society's norms to change the world. And of course, those of us who look back at the lives of these women, we can see that we are where we are and we are who we are,
Mm.
really in some measure because of the women who have, been our pioneers, and not just in real life and history, but also our pioneers in literary lives and mythological lives and so on. Yes, so
What a
that's
beautiful debut that was, Debjani. That was awesome. What a beautiful, bombastic way to enter the literary world. I mean, I get goosebumps thinking of the book, the book, the way the anthology was presented, and I think this poem found its way in many books. Whenever we talk about Debjani, what comes to our mind is a teenager's poem, and you have emerged and grown and matured after that. You've authored, edited, translated 75 books. How do you decide which story or themes to explore when you write? And do you find certain stories seeking you, or rather than you seeking them? How is it? Does it work for you this way or that way when there is a story or a
both.
theme?
Well, the short answer is both, Minakshi, because in some cases, as in the case of I Was That, the poem, I Was That Woman, that was something that came to me. And once I had written the poem, I obviously I tried to place it somewhere, because we writers don't just write for ourselves. We
Yes.
do write in order to share our writing with the world. And so initially, when I was, as I say, 19, 20, I did send it. And because I was in the United Kingdom at the time, and I sent it to a few of the leading feminist magazines, thinking that this is quite a feminist poem, and so maybe it will find a welcome home in one of these magazines. But it didn't. And so the editors actually said, although they enjoyed the poem, but they felt that there were too many references and too many cultural references, which would go over the heads of readers. Even though, I'm somebody who quite enjoys giving footnotes, because don't see any problem with actually a writer helping the reader, to be better informed. However, it wasn't until a couple of years later, when I was a PhD student at Lancaster, and decided that, okay, if the Western magazines were having difficulty with this, let me send it to an Indian magazine. And the Illustrated Weekly of India was a very famous cultural magazine at the time in English. And the poetry editor was Nissim Ezekiel, again, one of my many
Wow.
literary heroes. And,
Wow.
Ezekiel loved the poem. And so it got published first in India. And once it was published, it was very quickly picked up by many other, anthologies. It was picked up also by publishers who were bringing out textbooks. So Longman Education, for instance, made it a poem in one of their textbooks for the learning of English, and so on. But at the same time, I do write sometimes to order, and this
Mm.
does seem perhaps strange for some people, because I have heard people saying to me, how can you be inspired to write about a subject that somebody else has given you? And I
Mm.
think it's the sign of a professional writer to to make one's own inspiration. So I have taken commission sometimes to write. So I'll give you an example. Once I was asked if I would write something about Sigmund Freud. And this was because it was, an anniversary that was coming up to do with Sigmund Freud. And so this particular organization, I think they would call themselves the Blue Nose Poets, and
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to commission. They wanted to commission half a dozen poets in the UK to write a poem on any aspect of Sigmund Freud's life, Sigmund Freud's work, and they then wanted us to come to the building where Freud lived in London when he
Ah.
was in exile, and then to give a reading of the poem. So so it's wonderful to have that because what it then did was it gave me the opportunity to do some research into Freud, to read
Sure.
biographies, and of course to read Freud's own work, and
Mm.
and then to pick an angle, because very often the best poems and stories tend to be the ones where you present your subject, but you come to it from a particular angle rather than
Mm.
confront it absolutely head on.
Yes.
So I decided to write about the time when Freud in exile was an old man, not in good health, and he obviously didn't have very many years left. And the whole world had come to knock on his door at this point. He was famous. And so many people came, and not just people who were, if you like, students of psychology and psychoanalysis, but the people who came included, writers and artists. And so Salvador Dali was among the many visitors who came to see
Wow.
Freud. And when Dali came, Dali said to Freud, would you mind if I do a sketch of you? And and Freud thought, yeah, this is a very normal request. I would expect that from from an artist, from a visual artist.
Artist.
Okay, you can. And Dali very quickly did a sketch, and so he said, I've done it now. And Freud thought that was very quick. So can I have a look at it? And Dali very proudly showed him this picture. And Freud was quite taken aghast because what he saw looked like a snail, you know. It didn't look like him at all. It just looked like a snail's head. And but I'm sure, I tried to imagine what would, okay, so he was aghast, but was he polite enough? Would he have actually said to Dolly, oh, this isn't me at all? Um, and and I also thought, what was it that Dolly saw in Freud to make him come up with a drawing like that? And so, being a
Mm-mm.
poet, this is where we can be inventive. So, so I wrote about the fact that Freud Freud spoke about totemic people having
Yes.
totems, people having totemic ancestors. And so, as you know, my family name Chatterjee means that I have a totemic ancestor, and my
Yes.
totemic ancestor would be Garuda, who is
Mm.
half man, half bird. And
Bird.
so, and so totems. So think about the different creatures, on totem poles, and
Mhm.
and also the English nursery rhyme about what little boys and little girls are made of. And you know that
Snail. Oh, yeah.
girls are sugar and
And
spice,
all that's nice.
and little puppy dogs' tails and snails and stuff in their pockets. And I thought, okay, so this is where it's coming from. Voila, you get a poem.
Yes.
So it is a creating one's inspiration as well. So both the things have run parallel for me. Subjects of my own choosing, and subjects that other people have given me, and they're both good.
Wonderful, wonderful. From leading Sheffield's Racial Equality Council to advocating for the arts, psychotherapy, your career, Debjani, has spanned diverse fields. How do these experiences enrich your understanding of humanity and shape your creative process as a writer?
Well, you know, when I was very young, well, when I was a child, I wanted to be a writer. I did want to be a few other things as well at the same time. I wanted to be a hermit and live in a cave in the Himalayas and meditate. I also wanted to be a submarine pilot and in the Indian Navy, mind you, at a time when girls were not taken into the Navy. And thank God they are now. And I also wanted to be a spy at one time. So there were lots of things I wanted to be, but the one thing I always wanted to be was a writer, poet, storyteller. And I'm so glad that I've been able to fulfill that dream, because I do feel sorry for so many people in the world who are in dead end jobs or who are in good jobs but don't appreciate them enough because it's not the job they wanted to do.
On.
So, um, so I've been very privileged. And
Wonderful.
one thing I would say was I always wanted to write it, but my parents always warned me that no, they thought that writing was not a proper job. So they always said, no, no, you must, study hard, and then you must get a good job and write in your spare time. And in the beginning, I did listen to them. It, and you know, and I had a lot of so-called proper jobs. But now, as I look back, I'm glad of it, because for a writer, life experience is extremely important. And
True.
so all these jobs gave me life experience. They contributed to my life experience. And I think I'm glad also because to some extent these were writers that helped to root me uh, to some level of practicality. Because otherwise, I'm afraid it's quite possible that I might have become one of these writers who lived in a, on a different planet, basically. So, yeah, so it was good. The steel
Mhm.
industry. And of course, I started working very early. I was an undergraduate in Egypt at an American university when I had a student job in the library. And that's how it all started. But alongside the paid work, there's always been a good level of voluntary work as well, because
Mm-mm.
I believe very strongly in voluntary work. And yeah, so, and that too, for me, has encompassed a great deal of diversity. So the voluntary work, my work with people with mental distress, my voluntary work in working at a place called a rape crisis center in Sheffield, my voluntary work uh, dealing, for instance, with palliative care, my voluntary work with cancer patients and survivors, all of that has been, I would say, equally inspirational and
Yes.
important for me as the paid work.
Wonderful. You know, your children's book story, it's wonderful. I have the entire collection, The Elephant-Headed God and Other Hindu Tales. It's beautifully introduces Hindu mythology to young readers. How do you approach such delicate topics? It's a balanced topic between culture, preserving culture, and the accessibility for a global audience. Now, Ganesha is known globally, but you know, how do you balance that? It's a very thin line because we're talking about religion, mythology. We're talking about a character that unites.
Yes,
How did you do that? How do
might
you?
be.
So go ahead, Debjani.
Well, for me, I have to first, perhaps this is not true with all writers, but for me, I have to fall in love with the character, and then I want to, you know, give their stories to the world. So I do love the character of Ganesha, but having said that, maybe the fact that I've lived in many different countries has helped, because that has helped me to see that this is a story that doesn't just belong, to India. It doesn't just belong to one faith community. It's a story that has its universal aspects. And this is something that I've very much appreciated from the beginning, because apart from a book like The Elephant Headed God and Other Hindu Tales, or a book in which another of my books, which was brought out by Rupa, is all about, the tales of Hanuman and so on. But I've been fascinated by characters from world mythology. So, so one of my books is called Monkey King's Party, and
Yes.
Monkey King is the Chinese, hero of an epic poem, and Monkey King has similarities as well as differences, of course, to the Indian hero Hanuman,
Hanuman.
much more mischievous, for instance. And so I've had the same need just as I want the world to get to know Ganesha and appreciate Ganesha and chuckle at, at Ganesha's doings, in the same way, Ganesha's love for laddus and just his jollity. And so Ganesha, I have to say, is a big favorite and figures not only in my stories, but figures in my poetry quite a lot, and elephants as well, generally. But but a character like Monkey King, again, a Chinese hero, but I would like the whole world to get to know him and to appreciate his humor, and to love him as I do. So yeah, so that's definitely been there uh, with all the mythological heroes for me.
You've won so many, you've worn so many hats. I can go on and on about you because I can't put you in a box. You're a poet, and that too, accredited, awarded international poet. You're an editor. You're a psychotherapist. You're a cultural advocate. You're a cancer warrior. You go around talking about palliative care. Which role, Debjani, is closest to your heart, and why?
Oh, that's a naughty question, Meenakshi. A really naughty question, because it's actually, in a way, it's on a par with the question, which of your books do you like the
Is your
most, or
favorite?
which of your books are you most fond of? And I'll tell you why. The thing is, if you asked me which is the book that you which is the most important book for you, which is the book you're most fond of, I have to tell you, it's the one I haven't written yet. So it's the next one. It's the one I'm working on now, the one that hasn't yet seen the light of day. And so, in a way, of course, I do have ownership of all the books, all the stories, all the poems, all the plays that I've written. And at the time when I'm submerged in the subject and I'm grappling with the style, I'm grappling with the form in which I'm going to express myself, at that moment, that particular style, that subject, let's say I'm writing a ghazal. And at that moment, if you asked me, I would say, yes, the ghazal is the most beautiful form of poetry. And not that it is for all time, because they are all beautiful. The haiku is beautiful, the sonnet is beautiful, the ode is beautiful, etc., etc. But it's good if at that moment I can feel that this is paramount. And so in that sense, I would say that when I am engaging in one particular role, so you've mentioned Cancer Warrior, for instance. As you know, Meenakshi, I've had two cancers now and have survived two cancers. And one of the things I learned through my very first cancer was that there's a great need for more cancer support generally, not only for survivors, but also for the families and the friends and the people who care for cancer survivors. And so one of the things I decided I would do if I emerged from my first cancer. I mean, I didn't know at the time, of course, that I would get a second cancer, but I decided that if I recovered, I was going to form a voluntary group. And I called it the Healing Word. And I called it the Healing Word because as a cancer support group, I was able to use primarily my own skills at that point in reading, in writing, in storytelling, in poetry, and use those in a therapeutic way. And so that's how the healing word started. But in addition to the healing word, I've also contributed, when some of the British national cancer charities like Macmillan, Cancer Care, and Cancer Research, and Breast Cancer Care, and various other cancer bodies, and in particular also cancer organizations that have devoted themselves to promoting cancer awareness, especially among ethnic minority groups in the United Kingdom. And this is because, unfortunately, it has been the case that it is the ethnic minority groups, especially, where cancer seems to have been caught at an advanced stage, usually. So people have not presented themselves early enough. And so these are some of the groups where, yes, I felt a burning need actually to get involved and to do my bit to help. But I should also tell you about one particular activity as a cancer activist, and this is the revenge poems that I've written. So,
Wow, you actually
one
have.
has to be
Okay.
very careful. Well, one has to be very careful in, not making an enemy of a writer, because you never know when that writer will put you in a book. And either you as an individual or as an institution or a particular tradition that may go against the grain. And so one of the things I did was to write revenge poems. So when I looked back at my cancer experience, both my cancer experiences, but particularly the first one, yes, there were medical professionals who were not always as caring as they should be, even though they were working in a caring profession. There were people who made mistakes. I mean, after all, medical people can make mistakes. We're all human. But when when one makes a mistake, I think it's very important to own up to it and to say, "Oh, I didn't know about it." But what sometimes happens is people pretend they know, and then they give you the wrong information. So there was the general practitioner, for instance, who assured me that I didn't have cancer, that there was nothing wrong with me. Even when I said my only sister had died of cancer, and I was told, "Oh, but are you your sister?" And I said, "No, of course not." Then they said, "Well, then, there's nothing the matter with you." "Oh, we think it's the menopause, and that's all it is." Then there was, well, anyway, I mean, there were all these kind of things going on.
Yes.
And then, cancer itself was an enemy, of course, an enemy that needed to be confronted. Then there was also the many phobias surrounding cancer and surrounding its treatment. For me, for instance, needles are a huge enemy because with my first cancer, especially, I had to encounter needles, every day, and not a nice experience. So something that I found very therapeutic was to write revenge poems, and they helped in my own healing. But other people, when I have shared these poems, these revenge poems, have said they resonate with them. And so I have a revenge poem, for instance, about Northern General Hospital in Sheffield, and how in my imagination, I'd like to bulldoze the hospital. Um, so, yeah, um, that helps, definitely.
Yes,
Revenge poems.
yes, a boxing arena. You have received numerous honors, numerous. You're a humble woman, but I can see the list of honors, including the MBE and the honorary fellowship of the Royal Society for Literature, which is big. How do you perceive these awards and accolades in the context of your lifetime journey? And I also must add for all our viewers that she was chosen to carry the Olympic torch for the United Kingdom when the torch passed by Great Britain. So you're a torch bearer. You are literally a torch bearer in different fields. What does it mean to you, these accolades?
Um, they are good because it when you have an honor of this kind, um, it does tell you that you have won some degree of recognition, and some honors, every honor is different. So, okay, so you've mentioned the Olympic torch. So let me tell you about both the Olympic torch and the Olympic lantern. Not many
Yes.
people know this, but when in 2012, when the United Kingdom hosted the Olympics, obviously it was in London, but the Olympic flame went through all the major cities, and when it came to Sheffield, so I was chosen. Well, when it came to Sheffield, it was in Sheffield over 2 days. So in the first day, I was chosen to carry the Olympic lantern, and in the second day, the Olympic torch. So I had to on the second day, I had to run with the Olympic torch from Sheffield to Rotherham, which was the next town, if you like, from Sheffield. So the Olympic lantern had to be taken into the Children's Hospital in Sheffield. And so I had a connection with the Children's Hospital because some years earlier, I had been a writer in residence and poet in residence, storyteller in residence for a 6-month period in the Children's Hospital. So it was lovely. So having that honor meant, of course, that I had a chance to revisit the Children's Hospital and to work with children, to bring back, to bring some joy to them, to show them. And the reason for the lantern and the hospital connection, of course, is you will remember from history, Florence Nightingale and being the lady with the lamp. So that was the connection here. And I think a lamp is always a symbol of inspiration anyway. But
Yeah.
so is a torch. So on the second day, running with the Olympic torch from Sheffield to Rotherham, you see, I do consider Sheffield my home at present. I have lived in Sheffield the longest now of all the many, many places where I've lived. And so it does feel special to know that I'm representing Sheffield, the people of Sheffield in that sense, and also that the people of Sheffield are lining the roads to watch me as I'm, running past with the
Running.
torch. So that was
Mm.
great. There are other honors. There are some honors where, okay, like I'm an FRSL, which means I'm an honorary fellow of the Royal Society for Literature. So that particular honor, and also a good many years before that, when I was elected to the Poetry Society's board, full council, I should say. These honors were special in a different way because they were a recognition that it's my peers, my fellow writers who have chosen me, because one
Wow.
gets elected to get those honors. So I know that my fellow writers have recognized my work and its worth. And it's my fellow writers then who voted for this. Then there are other honors like the MBE. So,
Mm.
membership of the Order of the British Empire.
British.
And
Yes.
so when I got my MBE in the New Year honors list, uh, it came at a crucial time because I was very ill with cancer. And so in fact, I, wasn't well enough to go initially to Buckingham Palace to receive the MBE. When I was asked to come and meet the Queen, the late Queen, and it wasn't possible. But then I got the message from Buckingham Palace that when I recover from the cancer and when my doctors allow me to travel, then I should come again. And so I did that. And the Queen was not in Buckingham Palace at the time. So it was Prince Charles, who now the king, of course. And but he was standing in for the Queen at the time. And of course, he was a crown prince then. And it was a wonderful experience again, because Prince Charles, as he then was, is somebody who is pretty erudite, and
Yes.
in the royal family he does have a reputation for being a lover of books. So Prince Charles did ask me a lot of pertinent questions, and and here's a little anecdote. So when I went to Buckingham Palace, there were other people with me, including Kylie Minogue, the
Oh,
musician, the singer,
singer.
and we were all being coached. Yeah, we were all being coached that the gentleman must bow, the women should courtesy, and I thought,
Yeah.
should courtesy to the crown prince, and I was thinking about this, and somehow I was not feeling altogether happy about it. And so when they announced my name, of course, I was wearing a sari as well. Um, and, I was practically bald at the time because, of course, with cancer, I had lost all my hair. Um, and people had said you should wear a wig. And I said, no, I don't agree with wigs. I mean, those who want to wear wigs, that's fine for them. But, I happen to be bald, so I'll remain bald. And anyway, so I went up to Prince Charles and I didn't courtesy. Instead,
Mm.
I did a namaskar. And
Wow.
Prince Charles was a little bit taken aback, but he quickly recovered himself. And because, of course, everybody else had been courtesying, so he hadn't expected that. And he talked to me quite some time, quite at length. And then when we had finished, it was Prince Charles who then did a namaskar to me.
Wow.
And of course, we both did a namaskar. He pinned the MB on my sari, and yeah. And of course, a lot of people were saying, "What did you say to Prince Charles? What was he saying to you? Why was he taking so long?" But all I can say is, some honors, like the MBE, they are an indication, I suppose, that you have arrived at some point, at some stage where the establishment is recognizing you to an extent, which really, for somebody who is an adopted daughter of the United Kingdom, and I'll always be an Indian British writer. So, but to have that recognition, and also when institutions like the British Council or the Arts Council have sent me abroad and asked me to represent the country as a writer, I have appreciated it because I felt that, as somebody from an ethnic minority and somebody who was born, outside of the United Kingdom, you have to really make your presence felt. You really have to work hard to get that recognition. So when the recognition comes, well, mind you, I haven't reached the top of the mountain by any means. Yes, it's an MB, but it does mean that, okay, some people in the establishment obviously do think that my work is valuable and do think that I'm contributing something from whatever perspective, and certainly an outsider's perspective, but nevertheless that it's an important perspective, and I am contributing to British literature, contemporary British literature. So yeah, it is good. But as I say, each honor has its own individuality. So where is that honor coming from? What does it mean? And they all mean something different.
Wonderful, Debjani. It has been so interesting, but time is the betrayer. We don't have too much time, and I wish I could just capture you and keep talking for years. But we have the production team with us, and we've got some questions from the audience. So I guess we should just bring the blue tick in and get those questions across so that our students, our viewers, can get their best opinions out.
Hi, ma'am. It has been an honor to listen to you for the last almost an hour. It's been really inspiring for every one of us. And I'm sure when this session goes out in public for everyone to listen to your inspiring story, I think many, many, many new poets, new writers will get inspired by your wonderful words and your journey. Let me quickly get to the questions. We have selected few of them. I will take up three questions. I go with the first question. In a world increasingly divided by differences, what role do you think literature and the arts play in fostering unity and empathy across cultures?
Yes, as I said, one of the things that makes any literature stand out, and also that makes any literature have immortality and live through the generations, is its universality. It is the universal values that it espouses. And I'm proud that I have my origins from this country, from India, because what is best about Indian culture, best about Indian civilization, and best about Indian values, I think, are the universal values. They are the
Very
values that allow us to see solidarity, across cultures, within our own country, the cultures, the communities, the faiths, generations, the genders, and also across the borders. So that solidarity, I believe, about India, and it's something that long may it live. I know it has its enemies, and I do believe that it becomes every writer to stand up for the best values. So it's not just solidarity, of course, it's other values as well. And I've
right.
particularly, well, all my life really championed equality. So equality in diversity and unity in diversity. So in equality, I do believe very strongly that you cannot have only racial equality on its own. You can't have only gender equality on its own. You do have to have alliances. So if you're going to promote, for instance, gender equality and say that I'm standing up for, for feminist values, then yes, do by all means. But in that case, be prepared also to stand up for the same equality for people of different abilities, and the same equality for different races, for different faiths, and so on. And so, yes, again, I believe that that's a value that all writers should aspire to. And I should actually maybe very quickly mention here that, because language keeps changing, we now find that some of our heroes from the past have had feet of clay. Why? Because they may have they may have been heroic in some way. The language they used perhaps was racist because they belonged to a time when such language was common, or they have used sexist language, for instance. So I'm thinking, for instance, of Roald Dahl, who is very well known as a children's writer internationally.
Yeah.
Roald Dahl's publishers decided that they were going to revise his books to bring the language up to contemporary values. And many writers didn't agree with this, many writers resisted this. But I was among the few writers who actually approved of what his publishers had done. So, yes, um, you know, our values also change, that is true. But nevertheless, writers, yes, writers have definitely a very important role to play in espousing universal values.
Thank you. I think it's so
I hope that
wonderfully expressed. Yes, yes, yes. You have very wonderfully explained your viewpoints, and it's well taken. The second question is, you have lived in so many countries and experienced diverse culture. As a storyteller, I'm sure you are a story collector as well. So, is there any particular story or tradition or experience from your travel and your journey across countries that still inspire you and still sets a very important and special place in your mind?
Well, in a sense, I've already said that they all do. So let me give you some examples then. One of my books is called Sufi Stories from Around the World. So I've lived in Egypt, and so one of the stories there is of an Egyptian Sufi. Then I've lived in what used to be East Pakistan and is now, thank goodness, Bangladesh. And yes, Sufis from Bengal, but Sufis also from Baba Farid from what is now Pakistan, and indeed Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia, a very great Sufi that Delhi is uh, proud to celebrate. So and Begum Rukia, I've mentioned before as one of my heroes. So she's somebody I mentioned in I Was That Woman. So yeah, so these are all Sufis and many others. Sufis in China, Sufis in Morocco, people that I have written about, and yes, they continue to inspire me. But at the same time, it's also people I've met. Um, you know, some are celebrated people. Like, let me mention Sheikh Mujib. He was actually a neighbor of ours when my father was posted to Dhaka. And And at the time, he was not that well known. He was living in a part of Dhaka which is called Shegun Bagicha, and but he later became, of course, as we know, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib. And in my childhood, I saw the language movement, very much. Wanting the language Bengali, which is my mother tongue as well. And then, so one thing I would say to all our viewers and listeners is that it's not just Debjani Chatterjee who lived through momentous times, which we look back on and think of as history. Yes, the times I lived in were momentous. There was the Red Guard movement in China when I was living in Hong Kong, and China cut off the water supply to Hong Kong. There was Egypt when I arrived in Egypt. Egypt had just lost a war against, with Israel. But we are all living in momentous times. We don't always realize it. It's only perhaps with hindsight that we realize, oh, that was a particularly significant time in history. Oh, that was historic. We are all living history. But one thing
Right.
I should also say, we are not just living history, we are creating history. And that's the important thing. So let us all create history because we have it in us to leave the world a better place. Whether we leave it a better place, to a very small extent or to a large extent, doesn't matter. We have to do our own little bit. And yeah, so every bit of our own lives has that same inspirational value and importance in terms of narrative and inspiration that any story from the past or any contemporary story, any literary story, any mythical story, our own actual lives have that same importance and inspiration if we allow it to. Sorry, but I can't single out any one because they're all
Wonderful, wonderful.
No, I think you very rightly said there cannot be a single story there because stories uh, join together and make a bigger story. Small
you
stories
had
join.
a um,
Mm. Yes, yes.
yes,
And
that's true.
when you talked about Baba Farid, you talked about Hazrat Nizamuddin, and so when you talk Sufi, you can't single out one Sufi sect and one way of looking at Sufism or the Sufi stories. So I think you're very right in saying that all small stories come together to make a bigger story and make it a full circle. I think it's wonderfully said. So I'll come to the last question. What advice would you give?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. What advice would you give to aspiring writers who want to write about their cultural roots but fear of being misunderstood by the global audience?
I think don't worry about being misunderstood. Um, those who want to misunderstand you will misunderstand you anyway. And if you think about it, the great writers that we've had, great writers, whether Rabindranath Tagore,
Right.
who else? Let's see, Michael Madhusudhan Dutt, William
And
Shakespeare.
also,
All the great writers have been misunderstood in their time. So you're in good company. So I would say just go ahead and take your inspiration and express yourself the best you can.
yeah.
And that's the important thing. Don't think about whether this will be misunderstood. Some people will, and but it will reach some people, and so go for it. We can't always please everybody in the world, so that's another thing to bear in mind.
That's
But
right.
if you are happy with it, you know I know earlier on I did at some point say that we don't just write for ourselves, we do write to share with others. And that is also true. But we ourselves are the first audience. So when you first write something, you read it and try and read it with fresh eyes. So this is why when I write a poem or a story, I do try and put it away in a desk drawer for a little while, so that when I read it again, I can come to it, hopefully, uh, with fresh eyes, basically, and almost as if somebody else has written this, because it's important to bring a certain amount of objectivity to what we've written. So we ourselves are the first audience. So it must please it must please you, the writer, and after that, share it.
Hmm.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such wonderfully you have put forward your views, and we are really, really happy to have you with us. And over to Meenakshi
Very
ji,
well.
please.
It has been an amazing session, and I think what a beautiful sentence for us to end the session with. Rabindranath Tagore said, "Jyoti tor dak shune kyuna ashe to akla chalo re." If nobody comes to join you in the war, go straight, oh abhaga, oh warrior, don't stop fighting this battle. You have to go ahead. That is your duty. It is your karma bhumi. And Dr. Debjani, the Royal Bengal Tigress that you are.
And you,
And
and you know, Meenakshi,
it's I was not able to ask you to
that
read a
that
poem.
particular quotation from Tagore is a great favorite.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's a great
Because of the signal, there has been a
favorite,
Wi-Fi
and
issue.
it's so universal. It has inspired the women's movement. It's inspired the
I think there is a Wi-Fi signal issue, and it's so unfortunate I'm not able to ask Debjani to read a poem. But Meenamma will read from her book and give it to you very soon on the Insta handle. But right now, time is ticking, life is moving. Our energies are so high. The aura in this room has increased so much by such a luminary, such a great woman here, an Indian woman who has taken Indian flags to global skies and planted in the hearts of every country she went to. I'm really grateful, Dr. Debjani Chatterjee, MBEFRSL, I say it with pride, for being with us and for the India that you foster, that you take around. I salute the great mother in you. I say Vande Mataram, Jai Hind, and long live India. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Meenakshi. And thank you to all your listeners. Thank you to all your backstage colleagues. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great honor and a great joy to share this time with you. Thank you.